What's up, everyone? So today I want to discuss the dilemma of gym maxing and if this is a niche you should pursue in order to improve your dating life. So let's get right into it. So when we think about the main considerations on if you should sort of change your niche to be more attractive in dating, the main considerations I think of are, barrier to entry, the time commitment. Is this something you're actually passionate about and can talk about it where it's not going to be perceived as like faking it or trying too hard? And arguably the most important are, is this going to provide a high ROI for you? And are the dating options it's going to give you, are those something that you're interested in? Are the girls that are into this niche something that you actually want? Because you don't want to make that mistake. So let's get into some of the main considerations when we think about the gym bro niche or the bodybuilding niche, we can call it. Low barrier to entry. So this one, it's pretty generic because I think the mainstream will see this as the obvious way to improve your attractiveness. Because when you think about Hollywood movies, what is the male gaze going to see when they look at a movie like Baywatch and they see Zac Efron suddenly get jacked for the movie? Well, they're going to think, oh, he looks so great because his physique now. And they're not going to forget at the fact that it's really his face is what got him the role in the first place. So therefore, it sort of ends up becoming a saturated niche by default, and especially nowadays with a lot of red pill people talking about the importance of gym, like that's almost seen as your looks is the gym, and you have a growing amount of fitness influencers online, and there's a lot more exposure to this niche, and therefore it's a little bit saturated when you compare it to other niches that people may fall into by default just based on their hobbies or interests. Whereas I'll say the gym is something most guys are falling into towards the end of high school or college, whereas maybe other niches are something guys have like maybe always been interested in per se. So the next thing we want to think about is there's a strong genetic barrier to entry with this niche. So in terms of genetic variability with building muscle, it can vary a lot, and it's something where if you could pursue the gym full on 100% for 2-3 years, if you don't make a lot of progress, that time is pretty much wasted. Unless you want to talk about like potential health benefits or whatnot. But to really pursue bodybuilding like this in the gym, I think we can all sort of accept the fact that it's not the most optimal for health. And there is a way around this. So you can pretty much just take steroids, but you're just falling more into a trap of health issues, obsession with your physique, and other complications that could come with it. And therefore, you have to consider, is this an actual barrier to entry that you're going to be able to cross easily? And when you do build that physique in a few years and whatnot, do you actually have the frame? Are your clavicles wide enough for this to be an aesthetic physique and really for you to be able to maximize your muscle? And that's something you really need to think about if you're considering doing this with a large emphasis on actual dating, and you're going to make it a big part of your life, because ultimately there's a big spectrum to all of this and how you pursue this sort of bodybuilding niche. The next thing I will talk about is it's very behavior focused and has a mixed appeal because of that. So just due to the fact that you're going to be seeing like posing in a mirror, um, obsessing over weighing your food and your diet, and how you might be holding on to a little bit of water because you ate too much sodium the night before. You have to be like very regulated about potentially talking to women a lot of about topics like this. It's sort of like looks maxing. Like you really ideally don't talk to a girl that much about looks maxing. I think part of the black pill is accepting the fact that if she's really that into you, she's just gonna see a lot of what you do as like a positive feature due to the halo effect. But if she's not attracted to you, it could just be seen as cringe. But some of these like very, niche things that can be very obsessive and aren't like socially, adept, they still run the risk of like really making a girl think you're super weird, and you could fall into that category of being categorized as not neurotypical. So therefore, that's something you need to consider. Now, bodybuilding isn't necessarily seen as something where you're not going to be seen as neurotypical, but the actual obsessiveness with it is going to be a little bit like, it goes a little bit too far sometimes. Especially when you're talking about watching a bodybuilding show and you're saying, oh, this guy's glutes aren't all the way shredded. And it's just like, bodybuilding goes deep, man. So be careful. And then, so one thing you also need to think about this with is the time commitment. If you compare this to like a more musical niche or like a vegan niche, something like that, bodybuilding like hits on all of them. So it's going to be the biggest time commitment because you need to be going to the gym daily, tracking your food, eating a lot of meals, and if you're going down the enhanced route, like doing your cycles, pinning, doing all this other stuff. So if you're someone who's like a coach and you make a living off of it, like it's not going to be that big of a deal to you to like make the social media posts. But some of these other things, like it's going to take a lot of time away from your life. And it kind of falls into my next point, which is just the fact that it's obsessive. It can ultimately limit your desire to pursue, dating and social options because you want to stay on your diet, you want to stay lean and all these other things. So it's not really the most conducive to actually benefiting your dating life compared to someone who maybe likes going to a specific type of concerts that where they have a niche. Like we'll just say like the goth niche, for example, or like a rock and roll niche, skater boy niche, whatever niche you want to call it. They can easily meet people within their niche at like social events. Whereas if you're in the gym, it is a little bit harder to approach, I would say. It's a much more, crowd where you're going to see them on a daily basis, and it's not as good for actual dating within the actual environment as well. So therefore, if you really are falling into that like bodybuilder, like I'm going to compete end of the spectrum, it's going to be very restrictive and you're going to be almost forced to date another competitor, someone who's very into that lifestyle as well. But one of the positive I think you can't ignore with this niche, this is a strong male appeal. So if you're someone who was potentially bullied or very small throughout your childhood, then getting this sort of validation from other men when they admire your physique and you can sort of give them advice and pointers in the gym, it's going to be very validating to you. It could potentially give you a new light and new confidence on life in other areas, potentially, if you've never had that before. So there is, a big benefit with that because it's mostly attractive to the male gaze. But when we think about dating appeal, like I said, I'd like to make a tier list comparing niches to pursue within dating for men. But if you think about something like vegans, I think a lot of vegan men are going to pursue women who are also vegan because it makes sense. Whereas I don't think a lot of guys who go to the gym will only want to pursue gym girls. And I think gym girls are the main ones who are attracted to this physique. And I think there are some, negatives to a lot of gym girls. I've noticed a lot of gym girls have a lot of tattoos nowadays, and it's maybe not the most pure dating niche compared to others. So I think you really have to be very grounded in your approach to this niche because you may end up getting to a size where you're only attractive to gym girls, and I don't know if gym girls have the greatest reputation, to be honest. I know within like very big fitness circles, throughout years, even in the 80s and 90s, gym girls were kind of seen as, passed around a lot and not the most like pure or, loyal per se. So it is something to consider. And they can bring a lot of like drama to your life potentially. Now, I'm not saying I can have a lot of experience with being in this gym, niche, but based on what I've listened to within bodybuilding, spears and whatnot, and just the general reputation. I mean, they're wearing less clothes. A lot of these things that, um, I'll call them like micro red flags per se. That could potentially put a hindrance if you're looking for something else. So it's something to consider, and I think the overall fact that you're going to have to put a lot of work into this niche for potentially not a lot of ROI, potentially sacrifice your health compared to, something where if you're pursuing like a goth or skater niche, that's mostly going to be focused on your wardrobe. So you just need to get a few outfits, potentially dye your hair. You really don't have to put that much effort into that, and you generally like that music anyway. And I'm not saying people who are falling into this gym niche, I mean, obviously they're going to like it because that's one thing where the barrier to entry, it's a low barrier to entry, and a lot of niches are, but the actual sacrifice you have to put in to really belong to this niche, it is a lot. So it's technically really not that low barrier to entry. I'd say it's pretty high barrier to entry to actually get that physique. Sort of what I mentioned with the strong genetic barrier to entry. But in terms of dating appeal, it will require a lot of effort compared to something that's going to be wardrobe focused. If you play like a musical instrument, if you're like a singer in a band, like I think that's mostly gonna have appeal to like any normal girl. Whereas being a gym bro, girls aren't lining up at bodybuilding shows. So that would be my take on all of this. I would say if you think this is gonna, I wouldn't do the gym to like improve your dating life. I see it more as, look, I'm gonna build a good physique to sort of give me that extra appeal, to sort of be that guy that's like unforgettable to her. So that's sort of my conclusion. All this is ultimately, it's the cherry on top. It's what's gonna make you potentially unforgettable and stand out from other guys, but it's not something you want to market as being, your whole personality, or being like the biggest part of you. Even if it is something that's very important to you, I wouldn't market it or advertise it as something that way. Because let's be honest, a lot of girls and a lot of people in general, they don't have the discipline to go to the gym. So if you're sort of meeting that one extreme end of it, you're just going to be less relatable, and it could potentially negatively impact your dating life. So let me know your guys' thoughts on this, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks.